So good morning to all of you. Welcome back to the Namaste Experience. It is so great to be here this Tuesday morning. And that clarion call has indeed risen in our minds, and we have responded with a resounding yes. It is time to open our eyes to the real world, to the truth that is forever true within us. And it's a very new and it's a very ancient call. You know, a few days ago, I was at Namaste Village and I saw our dear Anne, one of our wonderful community members, sitting on the little swinging seat, reading a book. I think it was by Ernest Holmes or Emmett Fox, an older spiritual book from the beginning of the whole New Thought movement. And someone came up and said, wow, that's a very old book. I wonder if that is still valid, if that information is still resonant today. And I realized in that moment, and we actually talked about it, how clear the message has always been. We can look back hundreds, even thousands of years, and we can hear and feel that clarion call. It has always been fully present. But it's really now that we have ears to hear and eyes to see. We're no longer walking through the world like this, trying to block out that call to awaken. We are rejoicing as we hear it declared and proclaimed in every direction. And as you know, I love to look back and to hear that same call, that same message as it reverberates in some of the ancient lessons that we have been given. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about the desert fathers and the desert mothers who abandoned the ship of the world so that they could swim for their lives into the real world. And I want to talk about another one of the desert fathers today and a lesson that he received and shared that I think is so important today. And this was a Roman he was actually a royal tutor named Arsenius, who once again lived in the 3rd and 4th century. And Arsenius was deeply devoted, and he wanted to find that true path. And so he prayed and he asked God, how can I be saved? And he received a very direct message in 3 parts. And I want to share that message with all of you today because I think this message is so important to each one of us. Number 1, God told him, flee the world. Number 2, be silent. Number 3, pray always. That was the foundation of the message to all the desert fathers and desert mothers as they went out to try and discover within themselves that true, authentic path of awakening, the same authentic path that we are searching for and finding today. But this sets up the foundation into that experience. And we've heard this, especially that first part, over and over again. We've shared it many times in these sessions. And we hear it through all the great teachers and teachings throughout time, that we need to literally flee the world, turn our back to the programmed focus and ways of perception, of the ego mind. Now, if we think about that, clearly it doesn't mean that we're to flee the world by getting into a rocket ship and go into another world, or even that we're called to go into the desert or into a very secluded place and to live as the desert fathers and the desert mothers live. For most of us, that's not practical. But there are ways that we can choose, make a resolute choice to no longer fall prey to those egoic patterns that are literally the things that have kept us locked in place, all the while promising freedom, promising release, and yet piling more and more weights upon us so that we can't even begin to move. Now is the time for us to turn away from all of those egoic patterns. And we can do that in so many ways. It might be simply carving out time every day so that we can turn toward the divine within, turn toward God, and give ourselves, just as we would if we were in a deserted place, to give ourselves completely, which of course leads us into the second instruction that was given to Arsenius, to be silent. It's amazing when we think about this world that we have created and the lack of silence and the call to fill every moment with words and symbols and noise and sound. And yet it is when we are still, when we're quiet, when we listen deeply, that we begin to hear that still, quiet voice that is always within. And it may be very challenging for us to just sit and to be and to rest in God. But this is the instruction that has been given from the beginning of time by all the great mystics. Be quiet. We don't have to always fill that space. We can rest in that sacred space and allow it to teach us, which then leads to the third and perhaps the most important. And this was echoed when Paul wrote, I think it was in the book of Philippians, where he said that we must pray without ceasing. In other words, to have our hearts and our minds always turned toward the divine. Now, how do we do that in such a busy world, when we have commitments and when we have things that we have to accomplish consistently, constantly? And what I have found is that even when my mind is turned toward all the things that I have to accomplish and get done, my heart can always be turned toward the divine, can always be radiating that sacred presence. I have prayer beads that if people hang out with me, they see that I'm constantly moving from one prayer bead to another, because even the movement itself reminds me to keep my heart always turned toward love itself. I've spoken before about something that I remember from being a child and being in high school the first time I was in love or was fully deeply infatuated. We would get onto the phone and we would just sit and listen to each other breathe. We wouldn't have to say anything. We could just sit there in the presence itself. And we can see from that analogy, from that story, how all three of these instructions that were given to Arsenius can actually come together as one. As we begin to flee the world or to turn away from the constant demands of the ego, all to retain its position of power and influence. It's time, finally, at last, to remove that influence. We've often described the ego like a 2-year-old child that is constantly screaming to get its way, thinking that it knows the right path. But if you had a 2-year-old child, for example, in your car, and that child was constantly screaming to be able to drive, would you turn the wheel over to your child or your grandchild and let them drive your car and take you where he or she wants to go? Of course not. We have better sense than that. And yet, in terms of the way that we listen and respond to the ego, we do that all the time. We give in to that constant screaming, that craving to be in control, even though the ego or the split mind never knows what is in our own best interest, never understands the path into freedom, and yet we turn it over and we let them drive instead of doing what is much more reasonable. Anything that we would do with a 2-year-old child when they're screaming, we would put them in the car seat in the back, and if they want to scream, let them scream. But we wouldn't let them drive. And now it's time for us to flee all of those demands, to turn away from the world. Every spiritual teaching has been very clear about this. Jesus was very clear about it 2,000 years ago. And he was also very clear about it in A Course in Miracles, when he says, "The world I see holds nothing that I really, truly want. Nothing that will give me anything that is true, that is real, that will finally relieve the burden of all of that weight that has been piled upon me by the ego, keeping me from flying." But we have to remember that the lesson that follows that is that beyond this world, there is a world that I want. And the only way to access that world is to flee the ego's domain, to just give it up completely. I know in my own life that has been very prevalent and very real of late. I've spent so many years trying to assert what I believed to be through books, through lectures, through conferences. And now I'm taking a sabbatical, as you know it, and I've come to this very interesting point in my own life when none of those things seem to have any meaning at all. The opportunity to come here and to share every day as we do is so beautiful. But in terms of chasing after some illusion of fame or notoriety, all of those things have fallen away. And as they do, the call just to rest in the presence that is always present brings us into the experience of the mystical. And so there's one more experience that I want to share that every mystic fully comprehends and lives within. And this is very simple. This is going to be the third way of the mystic. And I wrote it down in just this simple way. It says, you must be willing to give everything to love, through love, and as love. You must be willing to give everything to love, through love, and as love. Only then will you realize that love is all there is. That love is all there is, the only reality that is forever real, that is here today and always, forever present, forever calling us. But we begin this journey by giving ourselves to that great love. Then we find that it begins to move through us in all of our ordinary moments, to everyone that we encounter. We feel that love moving through us, extending to everyone that we meet or even think of. And finally, that love begins to move as us. This is the direct experience of knowing that I am that love. Ultimately, everything we share in every lesson comes down to the simple truth that only love is real. When people ask me, well, what is the teaching of A Course in Miracles? The basic teaching, it's that only love is real. And if only love is real, then love itself cannot be compromised. It cannot be challenged because it's the only reality. And when we are firm and we rest in that, and when we allow that truth to fully take us over, then there's no stress, there's no dis-ease, there's nothing but the full harmony of grace itself. So whether we're reading or remembering the ancient teachings of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, or the founders of the New Thought movement, or the teachers that are with us today, just remember that it always comes down to those simple answers that were received by Arsenius 1800 years ago: to flee your attachment to the world, to be silent, to be quiet, to rest in that silence, and finally to pray without ceasing, to keep your heart forever turned toward the divine. Now, it really is that simple, but doing it, practicing that, can be a challenge because we are so well practiced at doing the opposite. So my challenge to you and to myself is simply begin. Carve out that time every day to turn your heart to the divine, to pray without ceasing, to be quiet, and to stop seeking anything that this world holds valuable. Remember, anything that the world of perception holds valuable has no value whatsoever, because it is in the constant denial that love is the only reality. But when you come into the direct experience that only love is real, that God is love and therefore so am I, all of those things simply fall away. They're no longer needed, they're no longer required. We can now simply rest in that divine pulse, the radiance of love itself. So that's what I wanted to share. And why don't we turn to Vicky first? Vicky, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll hear what Alden and Darla would like to share about that ancient path of the desert fathers and mothers.
Thanks, Brother James, and you sure struck a chord in my heart. And this is what really occurred to me as my experience these days, that it starts in our own backyard. When you were saying, you don't have to go anywhere, there's no big accomplishment, the fulfillment is in our own backyards. And it's the symbol of where we find ourselves as our family, whether our family of origin or our brothers around us or in a new neighborhood. Wherever we are, that is the environment, the most perfect environment to flee. But the experience I'm getting more these days is that it's not just a fleeing from, but it's a listening to. That's when we were talking about that clarion call. That clarion call, it's the call of the awakening, and everybody's working for it. And I know you can, we have been able to recognize that call. We can hear it in a movie, in a picture, in a message that someone's giving. The Dalai Lama is giving a free 10-day challenge for happiness right now. It's ongoing right now. There are countless guys who traditionally give workshops and charge and do all kinds of things that are offering free because the nature of love as us, in us, through us is free. It comes free. It goes free. It's our natural way of being. But when we listen for that call, and everything is a way of life. I listen for it in the children and my grandchildren around me. They watch endless movies, Moana and Frozen. But and I thought, wow, this morning I was thinking, look at that. Moana hears the call to free her people. Moses heard the call to free his people. Frozen, Queen Elsa, she hears a call. There's a call, and we are listening. And I hear it everywhere. I've been hearing it, of course, I love the Bocelli family. But the greatest gift, if you have time to listen to it, when I'm lying here in my little anchor hole, I put that song on repeat because I hear the call. They're working for the awakening. They work for Jesus or the atonement or the plan or the whatever, the universal mark of this is over now. Love is about to reign, and it's reigning in me. And part of the symbol of that are angels. Angels are singing everywhere. And more experiences and beings are sensing that angelic presence. So as the desert fathers would flee and would be silent and would pray, if we listen, we cannot miss it. It's everywhere. Listen for that sound of the awakening. It's everywhere. And when you were talking about the mystics the other day, many of the mystics have an experience that opens them up more of devotion. And you are that, Brother James. I am that. Many of us gathered here are that. Scott is that. I listen every morning for the call in Scott. What is opening up in him? Where is that call? And take that call and let it deepen. And many brothers hear it through the mind. They'll read it in a book. They'll read it from years ago or current, from Emmett Fox or from Joel or from Course in Miracles or Unity. And they'll recognize it and they'll ponder it and they'll contemplate and they'll abide in it, and it will open their mind. But many of us of a devotional experience that allows us to listen and fill our hearts with love and delight. And that delight is beyond this world. There is another world. We're already living in it. So that's it. I love you, and I can't wait to hear what Darla and Alden have to say. Thank you, Brother James. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Vicky. So wonderful to hear from you every day. We are so blessed. So Darla and Alden, back at Namaste Village, would love to hear you share.
Everyone here on Zoom and in this room for this holy experience we're sharing. Ooh, yes. So what I hear happening all around me and expressed this morning is that constant communion, right, is what's being said. And it's totally possible through discarding this world, leaving this, what you think brings you happiness behind. All of us are in the action of doing that in one extent to another. Fleeing this world is joy, isn't it? Being in God. Because what's the alternative? You're going to be in God. As James shared yesterday, and we're always hearing that God's essence of love is in all, and it is in all, right? And there's a line in the Course that says, you're not really afraid of God, your perception of God, you're afraid of love, that love is going to annihilate you. And God is love, right? But still, I like how it's said that way. You're actually terrified of love. And so that we're blessed to be where we are now in our awakening, and that we're not afraid of that. And that constant communion shows us what's real, right? We experience our reality in that communion. And as James said, we can go about our day. It's an inner condition. It's that silence in the inside that helps us stay in that constant communion. And the space we provide and the time we provide absolutely to commune with the divine creator. I'm thinking of the gratitude. Gratitude is another aspect of that, isn't it? You can be washing the dishes and just look out your window and see the beautiful tree and just give thanks to God, our creator. So that's what constant prayer is to me. Just it's often in just worship and gratitude, and just that constant devotion. You don't have to sit in a particular position. There's an idea that it's the quality, not the quantity, even of time, right? It's not, you can sit an hour and accomplish very little if you don't still your mind, or you can be 5 seconds with God and be completely, totally in God and have a revelatory experience. So I just thank you all for being on this journey with me, and ever expanding journey, as the mystic also is ever expanding, right? Wow. Revelation comes in when we make that communion time, right? When we commune with the divine, with our creator, we're open for yet more compassion and more revelation and more experience of being real, and wanting to extend that, as James said, and Vicky is always reminding us. And you stay in that extension of that, and it just keeps flowing in and extending out, right? It's a beautiful circle. So thank you for that. I absolutely can remember that, fleeing this world, being silent in the sense of these, yes, just being silent. That's when we hear revelation. That's when we hear the voice for God within us. So we, it's a crucial step to listen, isn't it? To listen for God's voice. And the third one, I know it's right there in my mind, prayer, constant prayer, right? Yeah, and we're associating that with just communion and devotion. So I love you all so much, and thank you for my ever-expanding journey, which totally and completely includes you. I love you all so much. Thank you, Alden.
Thank you, Darla. So here we are in the mystical experience that James is talking about. And the reason that can happen is because we're joined in mind. And one of the most important, as James and all of us have mentioned earlier, one of the most important parts of that is prayer. And we're starting, Namaste Village is starting a new prayer circle today. And that is a really important aspect of opening, like they say in the Course, prayer is the medium of miracles. Through prayer, you can clear away all the flotsam and jetsam of this world, all the problems, so that you can enter into that silence without opposition and worry and care about things that really can be taken care of very easily through spirit. So the prayer is a very important avenue to enter in and open yourself up to the miracle, which can clear away this the darkness of this world and let the light shine in to where a moment of silence can bring true joy. And Darla was talking about what we're really afraid of is love. And we watched a movie last night called Tar with Kate Blanchett. And it was a story of an orchestra conductor who was a genius and eloquent in her artistry, and she ran circles around all the people in her world. But at her core, she was terrified of relationship. And she left a trail of pain and destruction in her wake as she traveled through the world. And it's a story of how eloquence and genius will not make you happy. But true happiness and this is something that didn't come out in the movie, but I can pretty much guarantee the author of this script was creating a character that didn't know how to ask for help. That she was so certain of her specialness and place in the world as a genius that she didn't need to ask for help. She didn't need to pray.
Wow.
And because that would be another avenue into relationship, which would take away her specialness, perhaps, which was her greatest fear. So she had no interest in and was actually terrified of relationship. And that includes relationship with God, of course. There's only one relationship, whether it's with your brother or with God. And it's a nice story from that perspective, if you can see how much each of us needs to pray in order to enter into that silence of non-conflict. It's like when we in a relationship or we pray to God, ourselves, which are like half a mind, have the other half enter in and make us complete and takes away fear. And as separate egotistical human beings, we're afraid of that joining, however it may occur, through joining a brother or sister or God, through prayer or silence. That fear is suddenly you can't stand to be in pain anymore, and you do ask for help at some point in your life. And that's what we're doing here on a daily basis. As James said, prayer without ceasing. And that light is replacing the darkness that we once thought was our normal state of being. So thank you everyone for joining me in this great mission in the salvation of the world. I'm so blessed to be part of it, and I love you all very much. Perhaps James has a closing remark to make. We'll turn it back over to him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alden.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Alden.
Carla. Thank you, Vicky. Thanks to each one of you and your willingness to say yes to this, even though you really don't necessarily understand it intellectually. Trying to understand these 3 instructions that were given to Arsenius: to flee the world, to be silent, to pray always, pray without ceasing. The mind is always going to interject and say, how are these things possible? I can't do that. I have responsibilities. I can't flee the world. I can't be silent. I can't find times when I can really be quiet. How in the world am I going to pray without ceasing? And yet, the heart already knows the answer, already knows the path. We all know how we can integrate these things into our lives in ways that are appropriate and sound, and that will transform literally everything, not only in our lives, but around us and ultimately in the whole world. And that's how we know that this world that we perceive is not the real world, because it changes and it adapts to the decisions that we make in our minds. If we make the choice, the resolute choice right now, to flee all of those ideas and so-called realities of the world and go in a completely different direction, if we make the commitment to take time to be silent every day, and also to learn how to pray without ceasing, I promise you that the world around you is going to begin to change. It'll be like a miracle. It is the miracle. All we need to do is to commit ourselves to that. So let's do that together. Let's hold that sacred space out to each other. That's all we do here every day at Namaste Village, both here on the Zoom session, but when we live our lives, you know, the relationships that we have, when we have meals together, when we have events, when we sit and watch movies at night, all we're really doing is holding out the possibility that this is true, that this is real. It's not a possibility anymore, it's a reality. We know that it's real because we're living it consistently. So, that being said, I would love, usually I can turn and I can look at Scott and see if he's got that light in his eyes and the guitar sitting behind him. But if he is there, and Scott, if you would like to come up and wrap all of this together, yeah, there he is. I knew he had something. To wrap all of this together in song, I think that would be the perfect way for us to end.
Getting a little help from our Mexican friends. All right. James, brother, why don't you give me the first line in the song,
Okay,
and maybe the last line, and I'll fill in the rest.
okay, so the first line can be, the time has come. The time has come.
All right.
And the last line, flee the world.
Come back. The time has come to know we are one, and our heart lights are shining just like the sun. The time has arrived for our spirits to fly, never can die. The time has come for more play and more fun, and to pray without ceasing. Struggle is done. Struggle is done. Inside your heart there's a little boy or a little girl longing to play in the cosmic playground and free the world, flee the world. Let's all free the world by fleeing the world.
Nice. Ah, gosh.
Is that like a sacred toilet flushing or did the universe hear me sing waves without ceasing?
Thank you, Scott. That was beautiful. That brought it
Mhm.
all together so perfectly. And thanks to all of you. Thanks for your willingness. Thanks for your dedication. Thanks for saying yes and coming together. We need this every day. To start off our days with this communion, this constant communion that Darla talked about, is so important because the gravitational pull of the ego is so strong sometimes. And if we don't have this energy and this propulsion that we gain from each other, it has a tendency to pull us back. But if we just spend a few moments, as we do here, a half hour or so in the morning or the afternoon or wherever it is you are, just to remember and to share that memory, it helps us soar. That's what fleeing the world is all about. Not to be pulled back by the gravitational pull of the ego, but to fly. So that is what we do. So thank you, everyone. I love you so much. Have an amazing day. Darlene, Alden, Vicky will be back again tomorrow, and I love you, and I'm gonna just spend some time now. Bye. Namaste.
Bye-bye.
Namaste, James.
Thank you, Brother Jay.
Love you.
Love
See you.
you all.
See you all tomorrow.
Okay.